Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jessica with Literary Arts. Thank you all for being here. This evening, we're joined by the 2023, I can't say the years yet, 2023 finalist for the Sarah Winnemucca Award for Creative Nonfiction. For those of you who are not familiar with Literary Arts, we are a nonprofit, community-based arts organization with more than 35 years serving readers and writers. Our mission is to engage readers, support writers, and to inspire the next generation with great literature. Our programs include Portland Arts and Lectures, programs for youth, the Oregon Book Awards and Fellowships Program, and the Portland Book Festival. We also offer reader seminars, writing classes, and free literary events like this one year-round. Before we jump into readings by our finalists, I want to invite and remind you all that the Oregon Book Award ceremony is on April 3rd. I'm super excited to see, I think most of the finalists in person will be there. And yeah, just excited to celebrate Oregon writers. All right. Oh, some reminders for our audience. We will have a Q&A portion, but they will be following all of the readings. So if you can type in your questions to that Q&A tab right at the bottom of your screen, that's going to make it super easy for me to just collect all those questions and just have a smooth Q&A. All righty. Our first reader today is Lori Easter, who is the author of All the Leavings from OSU Press. Hi, Lori.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be amongst all of you. And I can't see who's here. So anyway, welcome. And it's nice to have you here if you're listening. Okay, so my book is an essay collection, and woven through the collection are 4 seasonal, what I titled reprieves, and one for each season. And I've had a really rough week, so I need a reprieve. So I'm going to read one of those. And I woke up to snow this morning, even though it is spring, it still feels like winter here. So I'm going to read Reprieve Winter. First thing in the morning, I step outside to take a shower and find it frozen. This happens when we forget to leave the faucet running at night. Typically, it is the narrow vertical pipe that stands upright from the bathtub faucet to the shower head that freezes. Sometimes, if I'm not in a hurry to bathe, I'll just go back inside and wait for the temperature to rise and the pipe to thaw. This is not always practical. Some days are too cold and it never thaws at all, or it takes too long and I don't have the time to wait. That's when I put the kettle on the stove to boil. I pour the boiling water over the faucet valves first, so I can turn the hot valve on fully. Then I pour the water up and down the pipe and over the shower head. I hear slight cracking sounds as the ice inside the pipe begins to loosen and separate itself from the metal. Eventually, the water begins to flow, first only a few drizzles and then a full spray. We don't have a bathroom. We have the outdoor tub and shower, and we have what I call an indoor outhouse, composting outhouse consisting of 2 side-by-side 5-foot deep chambers above ground built from cinder blocks on a concrete floor. It has insulated walls, a small window for air, and a roof, and is accessible through a multi-purpose room built to be a bathroom, but never finished due to lack of funds. Often in the morning, there is a layer of ice coating the bottom of the tub. When it snows, the tub fills, and instead of shoveling it out, I run the shower and the hot water dissolves the snow, which disappears down the drain. A few times I've been greeted by dead bats and live mice. Once we put one of the cats in the tub to catch the mouse, who then ran in erratic circles. The cat was more concerned with being in a bathtub than chasing the mouse, but the mouse did not know this and dove down the drain. We dismantled the pipe from the outside, and the soggy, defeated-looking mouse climbed out carefully and crept under the house. Sometimes bathing commences in the rain. There is nothing to be done for it except strip off my clothes and let water rush me clean from all directions. The hot spray intermingles with a cool mist, a gentle sprinkle, plump drops, or pelting hard pricks that feel like an attack from minute shards of ice. I have been even caught in a hailstorm. The first moments are the hardest. The peeling of layers to expose skin to frigid temperatures, the sharp inhalation of breath, the chilled feet on hard frosted ground. I'd like to believe that bathing in the cold makes for a hardy constitution and an indomitable spirit. It certainly is not for the faint of heart. Nowadays, the few times I take a bath elsewhere, I feel a bit claustrophobic, hemmed in by walls, no view, and a lack of fresh air. If given the opportunity, I don't know that I'd trade my outdoor bathing for the conventional. I think I much prefer open sky, where at night bats slip from the house's cracks and flap overhead in irregular patterns, and an occasional shooting star glides through the galaxy, where the moon and Milky Way slowly shift their locations in comparison to the silhouettes of trees. The tub once stood sentry in a field, a watering trough for cattle or horses, maybe sheep or goats, a footless clawfoot bathtub. A cast iron statue of sorts. It has a lusterless white porcelain interior chipped on the bottom in two places that look like tree rings. It is both deep and long and reclines at one end with a rolled rim perfectly molded for the grip of a human hand. The rusty gray exterior desperately needs a paint job, or better yet, a sheath of knotty pine paneling. How long had it sat quenching the parched tongues of gritty toothed muzzles? Did it languish in dusty, flaky earth, on hard, weedy ground, or in the mud? Maybe it was a social meeting place, like an office water cooler, where animals exchanged pleasantries about the way the sun glistened or how the breeze cooled their backs against the stiff air. Steve bought the tub for $25 from Moro's, a recycled building supply shop run by a guy who dismantled time-worn barns, cabins, and farmhouses in exchange for oak flooring, cedar paneling, French doors, and wooden-framed stained glass windows. Moro salvaged porcelain sinks, stainless steel faucets, brass hinges, and glass doorknobs, even fireplace mantles, chandeliers, and yes, bathtubs. He sold the tub cheap because it wasn't worth the work of restoring. And well, what good is a clawfoot tub with no feet? When we first got it, the tub lived in our one-room cabin set on bricks and boards. Shortly after Akela was born, in an effort to create more space, the tub went outside. At one point, we didn't have to worry about pipes freezing because the tub faucet had rusted through where it connects to the cold handle, and a stream of water steadily leaked. Now, the swivel valve turns the cold on and off, and even though the hose feeding the cold water and the pipe from the on-demand propane water heater are both wrapped in condensed polyethylene insulation, we let the faucet drip on the coldest days and nights of winter in defense against freezing and cracking pipes. Steve is a bathman. He clears the tub of any debris the wind has brought and turns the valve to make the stream of water as hot as can be. Because the cast iron absorbs and holds the cold, no matter how hot the water filling the tub is, it cools considerably until the tub has equalized, transforming the cold iron by absorbing the heat of the water. Steve helps the process along by pouring kettles of boiled water into the tub until he's satisfied with the temperature. For him, bath time is meditation time. He listens to kirtan and sings with the long chants until the water cools. I like to go out to the porch and peek around the doorframe at him. This is when he looks the most peaceful. His face flushes crimson beneath his beard and mustache, and a softness settles on his forehead, the creases eased, his receding hairline exposed from his long, wet hair smoothed back. Seeing me, he grins, and the blue of his eyes sparkles in the crisp winter evening air. Thanks.
Yay! Thank you, Lori. Our next reader is Casey Parks. Hi, Casey. Casey is the author of Diary of a Misfit, a memoir, and a mystery from Alfred A. Knopf.
Hello, so this is my book. It's largely a story about a transgender country singer who lived across the street from my grandma in the 1950s in rural Louisiana. And my grandmother first told me about Roy shortly after I came out as gay in 2002. And so the book opens up with the day that she told me about him. Okay. A few months after my pastor asked God to kill me, my mom ran to the bathroom and I ran after her. She shut the door before I reached it. I knocked, but she didn't answer. The rest of our family was in the dining room, eating spare ribs at my grandma's good table. Or maybe by then, they were listening to hear what I'd say to my mother. I pushed the bathroom door open. My mom was sitting on the toilet, bent over, crying into her hands. It was a small bathroom, only as wide as my wingspan. My mom was heavy enough that she often told people with some mix of pride and horror that doctors considered her morbidly obese. I stepped around her, squeezed myself into a space between the toilet and the tub, then I touched her back. She spoke without looking at me. I could lose my job, she said, half whispering, half crying. My mom answered phones at a church for $9 an hour, and my dad sprayed bugs for less than that. They had no savings account, no reserve to cover whatever my love life cost them. I knew my mom was right. One disapproving preacher could bankrupt our family. Mom, I said, I'm not going to be gay anymore. I had only kissed one girl one time. Her name was Ellen. We'd been listening to Pink Floyd and drinking Jones soda in the dark when Ellen leaned toward me. My twin-sized dorm bed felt like a gulf I'd never crossed. But then the song crackled, my heart beat triple speed, and the space between us disappeared. Her lips had been so much softer than a boy's. We'd kissed for just a moment, not even the length of the chorus, but those few seconds felt like a revelation I wasn't sure I could forget. I told my mom I was gay a few weeks later, in church, on Easter Sunday. I did not tell her about the kiss. In the bathroom, my mom cried so hard her body shook, and I racked my mind for ways to fix myself. It was 2002, the summer after my freshman year of college, and I was stuck in West Monroe, Louisiana until at least August. I wouldn't see Ellen all summer. She lived in Jackson, Mississippi, a few miles away from the private liberal arts college I was attending on scholarship. Maybe that break was long enough, I told myself. Maybe if I didn't see Ellen, maybe if I kissed the right guy, I would feel straight again. I thought suddenly of the tall teenage boy who worked alongside me Friday nights at Blockbuster Video. Mom, I said, I'm going to date Richard from Blockbuster. He's 6'5", like Aiden in Sex and the City. My mom's nose started to run, so I pulled a few squares of toilet paper off the roll and handed them to her. I wished I could tell her about that transformative kiss. I had told my mom about every kiss since I was 14, when an exchange student from Mexico smashed his lips against my teeth during the homecoming dance. I'd come home late and beaming, and my mother had driven me straight to Waffle House, even though it was after midnight and my hairspray had stopped working. I described everything, his cologne, the way his spit had overwhelmed me, the moment he'd whispered, I love you. My mom ordered a second plate of cheese-covered hash browns and asked me what song had been playing. I told her it was Love of a Lifetime, then she slow danced with her fork toward the jukebox to see if the Waffle House had it. I told my mom about every other boy I'd kissed, 6 in the 4 years since. But watching her sob in my grandma's bathroom that 4th of July, I knew I would never tell her about the Jones Soda or the Pink Floyd song. I would never tell her about the girl whose lips I imagined every night while I fell asleep. My mom cried without words or sounds, and I told her about Richard's car. It was a beat-up sedan, and his head touched the top of the sagging roof. His hands were big, and his Blockbuster uniform was so short it showed his torso. My mom listened, but she didn't say anything. Sat on the side of the bathtub. I knew she thought Satan had claimed me. She told the president of my college and any professor whose phone number she could find on the school's website that I would spend eternity in hell. She'd even persuaded a campus security guard to barge into my room periodically to make sure I wasn't doing anything gay. Aside from that one kiss, I was never doing anything gay, but it didn't matter. Just a few nights earlier, she told me that thinking of me made her want to throw up. Mom? I wanted to tell my mother that I didn't want to lose her. Not forever, not for the summer. But when she looked up, I saw that her mascara had run black rivers down her face, and I lost my will. She'd forced me to wear mascara in middle school, but I'd never learned to put it on myself, so I didn't wear it anymore. I knew she would reapply hers before we left the bathroom. She believed in makeup the way she believed in God, and I considered asking her to put some on me, too. Maybe then, I thought, she'd love me again. The bathroom door banged open before I could ask. My grandma stood in the entryway, wearing black slacks and a lime green V-neck t-shirt. She threw her hands up, exasperated, then she jigsawed her way into a spot near the sink. Rhonda Jean, she said, jabbing a finger at my mother, life is a buffet. Some people eat hot dogs, and some people eat fish. She likes women, and you need to get the fuck over it. Now come eat, she said, and let herself back out. Thank y'all.
That was so lovely. Thank you, Casey. Our next reader is Garrett. Garrett Hongo of Eugene is the author of The Perfect Sound, a memoir in stereo from Pantheon Books.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here with all of you. I'm just going to read from the beginning of the book. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I won't say more. It's called The Perfect Sound. I had been a casual lover of music for the longest time during my adult life when a lucky accident happened. Some 15 years ago, the CD changer in my stereo microsystem suddenly broke down, and I wrote a friend of mine, a former surfer turned English professor in Southern California, whom I knew to be an audiophile, asking for advice about getting a new CD changer to replace it. I'd just come back from Italy, where I heard opera performances at La Scala that were life-changing. They were so grand and beautiful. The magnificent first act of Puccini's La Bohème, about struggling artists in 19th century Paris, had completely changed my attitudes about poetry and music. I suddenly could not do without more of this remarkable art from my life. To me, a compelling blend of grand music, romantic poetry, and high melodrama. But living in a small town in Oregon, I'd no regular access to the grand halls of the American metropole, let alone La Scala. So I resolved to build my small collection of CDs to include as much from Italian opera as I could and listen to them every day, storing up capacities for romance, melodrama, and music myself. What started out as merely a wish to hear La Bohème and La Traviata playing daily on a stereo in my living room has morphed into another passion, not only for music and its great archive, but also for audio equipment and what each piece of it could do to bring me closer to what I thought I wanted to hear. I say what I thought I wanted to hear, as this has changed over my time in this pursuit, years long now. Ranging across musical types and performances becomes one of the challenges in the hobby, inspiring a seemingly unending quest for the right sound, the perfect sound. As my obsession grew, I discovered there was something else behind it that was driving me, a search to reconnect with my father, who passed away over 35 years ago when he was 58 and I just 32. I got involved with using vacuum tubes for stereo accidentally when sometime after I acquired a CD player, I ended up buying the very one that my surfer professor friend happened to be getting rid of. I saw a photo of a new Dutch-designed Chinese-built amplifier that was visually crafted along retro lines. It reminded me of my father's equipment, and willfully, I wanted that amp to be the one that suited my system. In the end, I bought the amp and rebuilt my system around it, learning how to shift the character of the equipment sound by changing its tubes, getting closer and closer to an early 1960s style of fidelity, which then let go a flood of memories of my father building his own equipment, testing it, swapping tubes, asking me to listen for him and tell him what the music sounded like. Back in the early 60s, it had been my father's hobby, and he built amplifiers of his own, filling our Los Angeles suburban living room nearly every night with big band sounds and Hawaiian hotel music. But there was a terrible irony to his listening. He was rapidly losing his hearing as an accumulation of lifetime misfortunes started to take away the easy and fluid perception of sound from his life. A case of scarlet fever in infancy had damaged his inner ears to the point that, as a soldier, gunfire didn't bother him, a trait that allowed him to place himself behind an abandoned German machine gun and fire it at counterattacking Wehrmacht infantrymen during World War II, as well as to work a jackhammer building runways for military jets after the war. Near the end of my first year in this quest for the perfect sound, I listened a lot in the mornings, shifting away some from romantic Italian operas to Renaissance choral music with its polyphonic vocal lines and profusion of harmonics. One morning, as I had the Huelgas Ensemble's performance of Dupre's 24-voice psalm, Qui Habitat, on the stereo, the Montana writer William Kittredge called. When I answered, he heard the music surrounding our telephone voices and exclaimed, "Heavenly choirs! Hongo, are you dead or am I?" It is a touch of heaven, this music, and that an audio system can catch a lot of it amazes and fascinates me. Friends and family call it an obsession, almost like gambling, and it is, draining a bank account, dominating a day's thoughts, and lingering into the night sometimes. I think of husbands who built bomb shelters in their backyards and basements in the 60s, of Dostoevsky running through thousands of rubles in a day full of casino losses at roulette. As a gambler himself, mainly at horses, my father would always say, "Bet your winnings," and I follow his advice. When I get an honorarium check for a poem or a royalty check for a book, I go online and find more tubes on eBay or a piece of used gear on Audiogon, an audiophile auction site that might get me closer to what I'm after. Fleeting clouds of music with a leading edge of silver from a sun I can't see. In the end, the main story lies in my own passionate quest, evolving from an audio ephebe into something else. Not an expert, but someone who could mix a batch of a batch of disparate machines and equipment, tweaking things with cables and different audio tubes, taking a pair of American Sylvania Bad Boy 6SN7 GTAs from 1952 and combining them with an English military Brimar CV 1988 pair, placing them in the input and driver sections of a KT88 stereo amplifier so that they together might form an electronic synergy that will play arias from Puccini and Donizetti that can make a grown man weep.
Thank you, Garrett. Our next reader is Laura Lafayette, author of Possums Run Amok, A True Tale Told Slant from Mercusha Press.
Okay, this is my book, Laura Lafayette, and it starts off in my early teenage years. I was untamable and wild, and follows me through adventures and traveling, and ends up in later years lost in mental illness. And this first piece is a poem that starts off the book. I wrote it in right around Portland workshops, and my friend Ben Morad helped me get it published in the Oregonian, so I think it's pretty good. But tied to the wall, I measure escape like frightened snapdragons posing for winter frostbite. I can judge acuity by leaning over a fire and listening, growing loudly in warmth or practicing failure, mad watch of the false start, skin ripping like ripe plums and punishing my heart and finishing. Then it just goes to this is pretty close to the end of the book, and it's called The State Hospital Again. A large room with strange people, many at the table. A man said they were trying to determine if I was in need of hospitalization again. I just wanted to go home. I recognized one of those stone persons as my doctor, a doctor who had given up on me years ago. I was frightened and very cold. I began to realize that I was slipping into can't move sickness. I stayed bundled in my hospital blanket, shivering in the August heat. My only reply to the questions speeding by me was, "I'm scared." They committed me. When I got back to the hospital, the patients were gathered to sing Amazing Grace. It was tremendously hot. Lights and shadows danced about me, and I was unable to determine the vitality of black spots and other assorted marks on the floors and furniture. They became frangulators. I smoked and smoked, looking for an in with reality. I had to sit through another tedious, redundant search of my belongings, yet I was nervous and bit my nails to the quick as they took item after item away from me, listing all the reasons that I couldn't have them. You could cut yourself with that. You could stab your eyes with that. That would be poisonous if ingested. I knew well enough that the items they removed would be lost by the time I could have them back, and my clothes were sent to be permanently marked with my name and the name of the hospital. Finally, secured in the hideous and dirty ward, I circled the room at a furious pace. Voices of demons and angels fell into my head from the diaphanous overhead protection from blue. They condemned me, taunted me, and when at last I ventured a soul-screaming reply, they destroyed me. I regained a timeline in a small bed, an empty room, my limbs tied to a bed frame. "I'm not your puppet on a string," I replied to an errant voice. I watched, mesmerized by the spatial equations that resolved themselves in the light fixtures that stared at my eyes. An ache in my bladder made me wonder who had to go to the bathroom. Uncomfortable urgency. Please go to the bathroom. Yes, it must be the nurse that has to urinate. Why doesn't she go? I don't think I can hold it very much longer. I can't do it. I can't leave this small dark chamber. Eventually, I found myself seated on a torn lime green vinyl chair by the television. So severely controlled was I that it hurt. I'm totally controlled and they're beaming x-rays at me from the clinic upstairs, I told someone in the nurse's station. Do you want a PRN? Asked someone. No, I cried, alarmed. I want them to stop killing me. I'll talk to you when you can make sense. Hours hung in the heavy air like the ball of the summer sun. Flies buzzed everywhere. They were caught in the sticky strips of paper hanging from the ceiling. Patients were lying in various stages of lucidity around the courtyard. Some yelled, some listened to borrowed radio, some just sat and rocked themselves back and forth, and all, unless sleeping, smoked and smoked. The currency in hospitals is cigarettes. I've seen women trade their diamond wedding rings for 5 cigarettes. People constantly begged for them or anything else they saw that they wanted. And no matter how insignificant the item, if you didn't want it stolen, you had to keep it locked up. Every day was a struggle for me. I tried hard to remember the past. I needed to convince myself that I had once truly lived. Life had seemed so remote and unreal. Had I really done those things? Had I been that brave? I understood suicide as few who remain alive do. I've lain in a bed barely moving for weeks, even when being there so long caused physical pain. So incapacitated was I that trips to the bathroom required dedication. Days went by without my noticing the sun had shone, nor could I appreciate the velvety texture of night's cloak. Weeks where reality was a gray void. To notice the sun would have been like a knife ripping into the swollen sack of poison that was my heart, and the poison seeping out would have killed me. Life was confusion and life was certainty. Confused by what am I doing here, and certain that the doors would stay locked. But once the always locked door swung open and a woman came in. I happened to pass by before it closed. I understood this open door to be a sign from God that I should leave. So I left the ward. No one saw me leave. I walked down a long corridor and eventually I came to a door to the outside, a parking lot. The bright day was insufferably hot. I walked out onto the street. There were fields on all sides. I didn't know where I could, should, or even wanted to go. I spotted a young couple. They ESP'd me to follow them, another sign from God. And presently I was back in real civilization, a strip mall with a large grocery store. I went in hoping to find cigarettes. I couldn't identify many items because the colors were too intense and they existed too strongly. But my nicotine-addicted body spotted the shelf of tobacco products. I had only the clothes I was wearing, so of course no money, but it had not occurred to me that I needed any, and here were all the cigarettes I could need. I opened a carton and removed a pack. I asked the cashier for matches. She gave me 2 books. I quitted the store. The sweltering heat drove me to seek shade. I sat next to the big building that was painted red, and I sat there enjoying my cigarettes for a time. I was soon to be aware of a rampant thirst so bad I thought I might be dying. I found a telephone and called my mother. She came quite quickly, and I enjoyed a tall glass of cold water. but then it was hospital again.
Thank you, Laura. And last but not least is Ann Stinson, author of The Ground at My Feet, Sustaining a Family and a Forest. And that is from OSU Press.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. This book is dedicated to my brother who passed away from cancer in 2014. And I'm going to start with a short section about him. Simple berry buckle: butter, eggs, sugar, lemon, flour, and berries. Picking the berries is the best part. It brings Steve to me. He died with blackberry scratches on his hands. And the vines still grow, trailing blackberries low to the ground. New vines stretch along the edge of a clear cut, now filling with 4-year-old pine, fern, and cedar, along with foxglove, mullein, and daisies. It was Steve's favorite spot and is still full of fruit. Next year, the shade from the growing trees might not let in enough sunlight. My favorite trove this summer is a broken down cedar log, decaying for 50 to 60 years. Its red flesh webbed with vines, each bearing 5 or 6 plump berries. A pileated woodpecker drums nearby. A hummingbird whirs in the fireweed. I am so determined to pick a berry hiding under a salal leaf, I get nettles on my chin. Steve feels near and I can almost hear him chuckling. An hour of picking it and my container is full. I walk back home in my hickory shirt and Carhartts, my arms and legs unpierced by the thorns. The berry juices paint the batter red. The oven that baked Steve's last pie plumps and goldens the cake. Our fractured but mending family digs through cream to the warm buckle and finds Steve berries from the young forest. The next section is just sort of an introduction to the land where I grew up. It's in Southwest Washington, about 70 miles north of Portland. My family moved to this land in 1972 when I was 9. We'd lived in Seattle for the 2 years prior and invited my best friend from those days to the tree farm. We had just logged along the country road that bisects our farm, and I ducked my friend's head down in the car so she wouldn't see the stumps. Where did this instinct come from? How did I know at 9 that city people look at a cutover, see only destruction? Logging is a link in the chain that brings a natural renewable resource out of the woods and into public, often urban space. It's almost as if it's handoff from rural people who tend and harvest to urban people who purchase and consume is secret and silent. It ought to be a celebration, a merging of peoples, and acknowledgement and appreciation of gifts. Language is part of the problem. We don't have a good name for our land. Non-industrial private forest is too bulky and tells what we aren't more than what we are. Timberland conjures up lumberjacks or shoes worn by hipsters. Tree farm makes people think of Christmas trees. The woods is what Dad says when he's going out to mulch, tube, or thin, but it's not really a name. Forest conjures up a park, untouched nature, but when was natural? Part of this book, I went to Japan with my dad. I had really wanted to ride a log ship all the way from Longview to Japan, but they wouldn't let me get on the ship. But we were able to meet the captain and the crew and then ride on the ship for 1 day in Japan. That was cool. And then they took us to a tour of a big mill in Japan where a lot of wood from the West Coast is processed. And this is apart from there. In cavernous concrete and steel buildings, I watch logs being sliced and diced, rolled along conveyor belts, stacked, tested for strength and moisture, dipped in an antibacterial solution, sanded and glued. The whine of saws and sucking sound of hydraulic pumps hurts my ears. The sharp metal flaying the flesh of the trees hurts my heart. Concrete covers the earth. Green steel blocks the sky. Industrial fans blow hot air and suck sawdust. Workers operate machinery, rarely touching the wood. I can find beauty in logging, in slash burning, in stumps, but this leaves me cold. I want to go back to the days of hand-hewn boards, but then I feel silly, like a disconnected urbanite wanting small batch, artisanal, single-sourced products that by their non-industrial origin are available only to people with wealth. I wonder how Steve felt about screeching sawmills. I know he wanted to find niche markets that would allow us to grow our trees longer than the industry standard. He wanted the forest to have another 20 or 30 years to mature and age, creating different wildlife habitat, cooling streams, and sucking carbon dioxide from the air. But I wonder whether his desire was also so our trees would have a less industrial end. I wish I could ask. We pull into a neighborhood street and stop in front of a 2-story house being built with Chugoku lumber. It's only the 4th day of construction, but the entire frame is in place. Because the wood has been pre-cut at the mill, 2 carpenters can put up a house in about 3 months. I want to know whether any of the wood will be visible when the house is complete. The answer is no. Sheetrock will cover the inside or brick and tile the exterior. I feel unreasonably disappointed. Why do I want all of our wood to be made into a thing of beauty? Why isn't sustainable, affordable, and strong good enough? At least the house isn't being built with concrete and steel. Steel production begins with extracting iron ore from the ground, never to be replaced. Wood production means growing trees, sustaining forests. I need to make peace with the fact that our trees may have a prosaic rather than an artistic end. As we drive back to the hotel, I tell Dad that we have the best job in the timber industry. Working in our forest, tending the trees as they grow is the best place to be. He smiles. That's why I left the mills after 20 years. As a tree farmer, I'm living my dream, just being out and placing a piece of slash next to a newly planted cedar, providing it shade for the summer. It doesn't get better than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you all our readers. That was wonderful. I'm changing it to gallery mode so I can see you all. I'm going to give the audience a chance to type in their questions, gather their thoughts. I was just going to start off with, I'm always curious how everyone came to their project, or came to this book. Yeah, a little bit more about the inception of all your books. I think it'll be easier if we go in order, but Lori, I don't want to put you on the spot too.
It's okay. I haven't spoken for a while, so well, my essay collection was a long time in the making. About 15 years from the time that I first started writing essays that appear in the book. And at first, when I was writing some of those earlier pieces, I wasn't thinking about it being a book. I was just writing. And as I kept writing over time, themes kept arising. And so then I started seeing it as a book. But it was a long time from beginning to end.
Mine also took a long time, 21 years. After my grandma declared that some people eat hot dogs and some people eat fish, she pulled me to the kitchen table and said, I grew up across the street from a woman who lived as a man. And this is 2002, so there was like no Caitlyn Jenner, no transgender tipping point. I didn't even know any gay people at that time, let alone any trans people. And she told me that there was a kidnapping mystery and that at one point Roy had been the most important person in her life and he played country music for her every night on his porch, but she'd lost touch with him and she wanted me to go find out about his life. He mowed lawns for a living and lived in rural Louisiana, and poor people don't tend, especially in the past, to leave that much of an archive or people didn't keep that archive. Like back then, the newspapers just documented like what rich white person was visiting another rich white person, and so it was very hard to find any information about him. So I just started going to this town and knocking on doors and asking people about him, which was an interesting experience because I look like this, and there, there were some interesting interactions. But one of the first trips, someone told me that Roy kept a diary every day of his life, and that his neighbor had taken them all. And so a lot of the book is about me trying to learn about him and to get these diaries, which Roy named Diary of a Misfit. But it was a long journey because people really did not want to give me any information. So the book is about just taking repeated trips to rural Louisiana and kind of how my family interacts with me through that. And it took me a long time to have the skills to be able to do it. I don't know if I did have the skills to really be able to do it, but it happened, I guess. So thanks for listening.
Should I speak now? Thank you all for your readings. It was quite illuminating to hear each of you read and how each of you dove into your subjects and with such acuity and drama. I was quite moved by each of you. So thank you very much. My book started simply because I became fascinated with opera, as I say in the passage I read. And then I thought, well, I've got to build a stereo system because I can't go to La Scala every day. And little did I know that it probably would take as much money to build a decent audio system as it would have taken for me to fly back to Milan every few months. But I did it. And as I say in the process, I started remembering my father and this peaceful quest of his to listen to his music for the last time. And I was moved in a way I hadn't been. I can't really, it took me the whole book to explain that feeling or those two feelings. And then also my relationship with music since I was a kid, starting with sort of, Hopalong Cassidy records on 78 and Mr. Taptoes on a banana colored 45 on a Fisher Price portable record player in Kahuku, Hawaii. All the way through, fake folk music and doo-wop when I was a teenager. Then Joni Mitchell, who was introduced to me by my first girlfriend, and in college with chamber music, jazz, and rock and roll. And then wandering in Japan for a while, learning Buddhist chant. It's all about that, and also popular music, which I had to listen to because for a while I had a car with only an AM radio when I was in graduate school, and I listened to pop music then. But it becomes a chronicle of two things. One, of my pursuit of creating the stereo system to play Puccini and Donizetti and Bellini's opera, and also to sort of tell the story of my own involvement with music, my own love affair with it since I was a kid, and how it associated with different moments of my life. There's a story I tell when I first heard John Coltrane's Equinox, and I was driving my mother's Chevy 2 Nova on the way down to Japantown in LA to pick up some money for a fellowship I just won so I could go live in Japan for a year. And then all of a sudden I realized that the jazz sentence that Coltrane was playing was exactly the same as the anaphoric lyrics of Walt Whitman in Out of the Cradle, Endlessly Rocking, a poet whom I despised all my college years because I thought he was so corny. He sounded like Stevie Wonder. And then all of a sudden, the rhythm of his verses, the Vedic rhythms, just overtook me. And I tell stories like that throughout the book. I meet the poet Etheridge Knight, and he teaches me about hog calling and field hollers and prison toasts, and I tell that story. It goes on and on this way. I also tell the story of being at La Scala and hearing La Boheme for the first time, of course. So it ranges all around. I even tell a story about Hawaiian music before World War II, and how it relates to the Mississippi blues. It's the same instrumentation and the same instrument, actually. It was this resonator guitar invented by a Slovenian in LA. And the first person to play it was Saul Ho'opi'i, indigenous Hawaiian musician who was all the rage back in the 20s. But then after Saul, Son House picks it up in the Mississippi Delta, and it becomes the instrument for the Black blues, you dig. So it's also a story about the interweavings of culture, I suppose.
Okay, should I go now? Oh, okay. I've always loved writing. It's always sustained me. And at one point, the big part of the book is a trip, just a really wild trip through adventures in Europe with my friend Key. And when we came back, we got into all kinds of trouble and stuff. And people would say, "Oh, you ought to write a book. You ought to write a book." And I always wanted to write a book. I had even attempted to write a book when I was in 7th grade. And so I thought, yeah, maybe, so I started out just being about me and my friend Keith's trip through Europe, but then it just started building out more and more, and I started having mental health issues really severely, and it was like I could glean bits of sanity if I could just write, and so I would spend time writing in the bathrooms of the state hospital and stuff at night because there was only light place, and so I got a lot of writing done then, and I just
You want to talk about right around Portland?
oh right, I got involved with Right Around Portland. My dear friend Ben has helped me so much with everything, and oh, as a matter of fact, he got that poem I wrote, I read from the beginning of the book, Tied to the Wall. He helped me get that into the Oregonian, so the poetry section there. So that was really nice. And it gave me, through Right Around Portland and reading my work and stuff that I wrote in the workshops, and it helped me feel like, like I was worth something, maybe my writing is actually, worth something. I remember I had times before where I would try to write poetry, and I thought, oh, what am I even doing? With it, there's Milton and Shakespeare, and I'm going to write poetry, haha, but it's through Right Around Portland and Ben, and help me understand that my writing does have worth, and so, yeah. So this book is kind of like my crown jewel there.
I'm not the arbiter of anything, but your writing definitely has worth. It's very
So, thank you.
I started writing around the time my brother passed away. I went to my mother is a ceramic artist, and she goes to art camp every summer, and I wanted to go with her. And I'm not a visual artist, so I took a writing class. That some of the things that I wrote are in this book. And then I took a couple literary arts classes, one with Mark Cunningham. He's a local author, and he has a Atelier 26 is his publishing house here in Portland. He really helped me with my book. He's the first one to say, you have a project, you have something real here. And so I worked with him. And then once I realized I had a book, then a lot of, I'm not muted anymore, do you? I really started to dig into the history of all the people who had owned the land prior to us. And then that got me into the history of the Cowlitz peoples, who were the first people there. As that was really fascinating. And then I really wanted to decide, I decided I wanted to find out what happened to our logs as they left. And so I visited some local mills, and then we went to Japan. And then I took one more class at Literary Arts, and it was, I'm forgetting her name, but she had a great exercise. She had everybody write their topic down and pass it around, and everybody could write a question or a comment on it. And so I was feeling a little bit pissy, and I wrote logging at the top of it in downtown Portland and passed it around, and people were like, do loggers wear plaid shirts? But they did actually ask some good questions. And so that gave me my first chapter. So I start the book off with harvesting, and then the last chapter is planting the same 12 acres. And then a lot about my brother and my family is all mixed in there. So that's kind of how it happened.
That's awesome. Thank you all. I guess I have a question about the genre, and a lot of you have already kind of answered about your process. So I'm curious, well, to me, creative nonfiction, is kind of like mixing some personal things, but a lot of the times also takes research. So I'm wondering, how do you, like, what is that process like for you? Do you start with the personal and then get to the nonfiction? Or yeah, I guess, what is that process for you? I think Garrett had to leave. He has ramen to make.
So are we still doing a round robin?
Yes, unless you're not
Okay.
ready.
No, it's fine. Oh gosh, I just totally blanked. Can you tell me what I'm supposed to say again?
Yeah, I was asking about like creative nonfiction and your
Oh, with research. Yeah.
yeah.
So for me, it depends on the essay. So the book is a lot about loss and grief. And there's different threads within the book. And one of the threads is my daughter had a very severe illness, life-threatening illness. And in order to write about that, I needed to do research to understand, what was going on with her body. And so I start with whatever it is that I'm feeling moved to write about. And then it's really, the topic demands the research, it just kind of unfolds where I see that there's gaps, and then I'll stop and I'll do research. Sometimes I'll keep writing the personal, and I'll maybe make a note in my document, that this is where I need to insert research. But often I'll just gravitate to doing the research and then writing that part that I've just researched. It's pretty fluid for me, moving back and forth between the writing the personal narrative and inserting the researched parts. And then a lot of my work is also playing with form. So the forms can dictate the research too. So I don't know if I'm being very clear. So there you have it.
I'm a journalist normally. I work at a newspaper, And so that part, I don't know if any part is easy, but that part comes more naturally to me. And I really did not want to include myself at all, in part because one of the tenets of being a newspaper journalist is that you don't put yourself in there. And I do want people generally to think they'll like get a fair shake with me, and not just think it, but I want it to be true. And I worried if I had like too much of my own life out there, people would think of me as biased. It's interesting, like because I'm gay, it is politicized, which is weird because it's an irrefutable fact about myself, and yet it is like I don't know, like when I got I work at the Washington Post, and when I got the job, I the person told me I couldn't write about gay marriage ever because I had talked about my own marriage in the book. So I can't write about Obergefell, which means like I can't write about abortion because Clarence Thomas mentioned the Obergefell decision in his concurrence of the Dobbs case. So it's interesting. I do still feel weird about it, and like sometimes when I write stories, people will like troll me on Twitter or something about my personal life. So I do feel strange about it, but as I mentioned, I tried for 21 years to do it, and a lot of times I would get rejected. Like I would apply for grants and stuff, and I would get rejected. And the people who would reject me would often like try to push me to put myself in it, and I really just didn't want to. And then I took a book writing class, and the professor made me try just doing one chapter with myself in it. And when I did, I knew it was better than anything else I had written. Like, as reluctant as I was, like I am a discerning reader, so I knew it was better. And then about the same time, my mom died. She actually died on April 3rd, which is the day the book awards. It's 5 years ago. And so I think that transformed how I thought about it a lot. And she's a big part of the book. But I still, even with myself, like tried to really report about myself as a third person. Like I kept a journal since I was a little kid, so I read all my journals and I interviewed people about me, and I reread all my Google chats and any text messages that I had or emails to like really see like who was this person, because the person that's in the book is a younger me. It's a different me, a less well, I don't know how confident I am, but it's a still less confident person. And it's interesting, there are a lot of things that I remember wrong, and I thankfully have the facts to prove myself wrong. Like a lot of the book is built on going on trips to the South, and I thought my mom only went on one trip with me, and the same professor wanted me to put my mom in the book, and I was like, she's not a part of this, she only went on one trip. And I videotaped everything, so I was looking through the videotape one day for something, this old lady singing this hymn she'd written, and I could hear my mom talking in the background. I was like, what? Is my mother here? And I just started scrubbing through, and she definitely was there, but like the hurt kid in me was like, my mother always disappoints me, she never went with me again. And I just made up a whole story in my mind. So I try to treat it as journalistically as possible, even though it is a personal thing. But it's interesting. I don't feel ever comfortable to like say I'm an author or something. I just still think of myself as a reporter, and because author seems like so vaunted to me, and not that reporter's not cool, but I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question, but even thinking of myself as like a creative nonfiction writer sounds like fancier than I feel. So
You're fancy. And were you raising your hand?
Raise your hand.
Address me?
No, I just had a follow-up question for Casey. I was just looking through your book. One of my favorite parts of your book is when you're with your mom at the restaurant, where you have the hot tamales that are only made the way they are in Mississippi, and then you go to that competition next door where the people are lip sync competition, and there's a part in there, you're in there, and then you go back and listen to the tape and are upset with yourself about how you sound, which I think is interesting based on what you just said. But because you really want to, use the specific details of the history of it, which is fascinating. I guess my question is, a lot of the book is about longing, about like wanting to be back in Mississippi, or Louisiana, but not really. And I'm wondering if having written the book has changed that longing, not like increased it or decreased it, but sort of changed the flavor of the longing in any way.
Yeah, that's actually my favorite chapter in the book. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
thanks for saying that. Yeah, it is. No, I mean, I guess it hasn't. The last page is kind of still true for me, where it's like I'm probably always going to be longing for this place and still always feel like it's not mine in some ways. I actually just did a little book tour there last week in the South, and it was the first time I'd been there in a while where I did just feel like free, and it was wild. Like there were like 100 people at every event, and I couldn't believe it. And a lot of them were like really young gay and trans kids who like wanted to take a picture with me, and some of them were like shaking to take a picture with me, and I was like, I'm not anything special. But then I was trying to think about if when I was 18, if someone like me had come down, like what I would have thought, and I would have thought I was cool too. And so I tried to just lean into it while I was there to think like this place will always belong to you, even if you're scared. And it's interesting though, because Portland also, I've been here since 2006, and it also feels like home to me. They're like two pieces, and I guess I'm becoming more comfortable with the idea that there doesn't have to be one place, and that they can each compromise me. I usually go to bed by now, so sorry my brain's not that good, but yeah, I think I'm always gonna want to be there in some way and feel right. And someone wrote me an email recently, and she's also gay and from rural Mississippi, and she wrote this line that said that she's always thinking, how can I return? How can I not? And I thought that was a really great. I was like, yeah, I just spent 368 pages trying to say that. So thank you. But I think that is my constant question is like, can I go back? Can I not go back? Like, will I really spend the rest of my life never going back there? And thankfully, air travel exists, and I can, take trips.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking though, and thanks for liking that chapter.
Laura, can we come back to you? There you are.
I guess I just getting to know the people I've come to know, and the experiences I've had, just just kind of led me down the path of the book there. And
Did you have old journals you went back to, or old notebooks?
yeah, I did a lot of writing, and my parents told me, don't take a camera to Europe, because it'll skew your, your feelings, they said write, so I did. I wrote a lot in Europe at the time, and I just kept a lot of journals, and just I've met so many fantastic, brilliant people, and really interesting people, and a lot of them are, mentally ill people that are having mental health issues, and it's just the way that the mentally ill are so, what's the word? It's ostracized, yeah. And the people, so many of the people I know are just wonderful, brilliant people, and just it's a stigma. Yeah, but I'm kind of, my dad had Asperger's, and growing up with him, he never had any friends or anything, and so I've always been used to people being a little bit, on the fringes, and so it's just,
You're comfortable on the fringes.
I'm comfortable on the fringes. Yeah. Mhm.
I love going down the rabbit hole of whatever research topic I'm interested in. And so it was really fun for me to do the history of the land. One part I talk about in here is Dad and I go to the Washington History archives to look at old maps and ledgers and things. And the Jewel is the name of the woman who brought us this cart of ledgers, and we went through one and we found like, one tiny bit of information, and I needed more. Anyway, we were there like 5 hours, and my dad, who's obviously not a young spring chicken, he was 86 at the time, and he's like bedraggled, and she's looking exhausted, and I'm like, but, and she's like, people leave after one cart. You guys have been here for 4. I'm like, okay, but I love doing, and I love reading like braided essays with history and personal stuff woven in. So that's one of the favorite parts for me. I think it starts personal, but then you find something that you want to know more about, and then that's a lot of fun.
We have a question about what other projects are you all working on or excited to work on in the future?
I'm just doing my day job.
What was that?
I'm just doing my day job. I don't, it apparently takes me a really long time, so I don't have another 20-year project in mind.
So I am working on another essay collection, a memoir and essays. So after I wrote the initial first draft of the manuscript, my husband was diagnosed with cancer, and he died very soon after his diagnosis. And so none of that is in the book, All the Leavings, which is so ironic, when that happened. And I thought, okay, this is a big cosmic joke that I picked this title, All the Leavings, right? And then that happened, which was the worst of all the leavings. And I contemplated, do I need to rewrite this book to include that? And then it was very clear to me that no, that's a whole other book. So, so he died 5 years ago, April 5th, Casey. So right after your mother. And I had, for the first 2 years after his death, I didn't write at all. And then I started writing in the 3rd year, and I've been writing pretty steadily since then. And everything that I've been writing have been pretty much having to do with his death and my process going through that. And but they're all short. So in my book, All the Leavings, I have a lot of really long graded essays and more complicated, I guess, pieces. And everything that I've been writing has been flash pieces. So I'm starting to think about weaving all those flash pieces together into a memoir and essays in flash. Don't hold me to that.
That sounds awesome.
Oh, yeah, right now I'm trying to get together a volume of poetry. And after that, I'd like to, I want to do more research into my parents' early lives and maybe write something that has a lot to do with that.
On the working title.
Oh yeah, the working title is Posthumous Possums.
We can't wait to read that.
I've been writing some poetry with COVID. I started doing a poetry thing with to Sylvia's Press in Seattle, and I met a group of women that are from all over the country, and we meet. Well, they meet every week. I join them once every other week, and that's been really fun. I haven't written poetry before, and actually I got the let's see, third prize for the new poet in the Oregon Poetry Association award. That was kind of fun. But I want to write about my mom. There's one chapter in here about mom, but it's very much about dad and the trees. And my mom, you know, her marriage announcement in West Texas said Mrs. Doug Stinson. And you know, then she joined the League of Women Voters at age 30, and you know, so there's and she's just a really interesting person. But it's hard, like, how do I not write it as a hagiography? You know, how great is my mother? She's also, you know, annoys me because she's my mother. But anyway, she's not on, I'm sure. It's way too late. Anyway, no, I love her. But anyway, so I'm thinking, I have a couple essays that I've written about her. Yeah.
That's so great. Thank you all so much. It's past some people's bedtimes.
Sorry, I work on the East Coast, so I just get up really early.
That's okay, no judgment.
It makes